Hello, reading room. It is still morning, and guess what? I'm early. It's day 338. Today is April 17th. We are continuing on with our, just as we always say, to keep trying to plug along and continue on until I see my entire family. Right? I don't know where we were is where I was going to go. Or, all this throat clearing either. How large is God? This is called How Large is Faith? It is chapter 5 in our book, written by all these guys right here, right? Or, some variation of them. To see whether or not the relaxation response had served this purpose for ancient humans, this is called the historical perspective. I set about looking for historical evidence of its presence. After 2 years of studying the literature of the world, I was thrilled to find that in every time and in every culture in recorded history, there were examples in which humans described calming techniques. These methods incorporated the two essential steps of repetitive mental focus and passively ignoring any interrupting thoughts to return to one's focus, and were indeed practiced in every religion and sometimes outside of religion in every nationality known to us. Now, these are really important observations to be paying attention to, because it's like, okay, what is it about commonality? And you can call it prayer, you can call it, and lots of people call it prayer, hate the word meditation. They feel like that brings it down as far as sacred goes, as far as being holy goes. And on the other side, they're like, who are you to be such a holy roller? And that's constantly said about Christians, right? I was pondering all this some 30 years ago as I mulled over the wealth of documentation I had accumulated about the relaxation response's physical value. I thought about how people in different cultures and times described the same physical relaxation that I had observed in my patients' experiences. And I considered what it meant that we were wired to experience this physical balm accessible by mental focusing. Suddenly I came to a startling conclusion. This is prayer, the quiet ritual that people had observed in many ways in many different lands, and that religious leaders always said was good for people, seemed to call forth a particular set of bodily changes opposite of those called upon in a crisis. Now, that's a lot fewer words than, for example, when you've got what's his name describing the stress response and just getting paid just gobs of money, not just for the research in the stress response, but every other piece of research that would cite him, for example, right? People seem to internalize and embody the repercussions of a repetitive form of prayer in ways that nourished them and promoted their physical health, not just their emotional and spiritual well-being. The study of prayer. As true as this realization seemed to me, it was a conclusion I came to dread. Because aside from being controversial, the study of prayer or any religious subject was considered unscientific. Nothing in my training as a physician prepared me to measure the effects God or gods had on my patients. And undeniable as it was, the people throughout history had practiced and physically reacted to repetitive prayer in ways that I could prove were beneficial to the body. There was little or no scientific precedent for studying faith in God or religious traditions as healing methods. Equally, I feared the reaction of the religious community. Would it appear to believers that I was trying to quantify God and to reduce the effects of religious faith to what I could see under a microscope? With this in mind, I went to see the Dean of Harvard's Divinity School, Dr. Christer Stendahl. Dean Stendhal was a tall man, especially to me, as I am 5'9", even with my best posture. But his presence was bigger still, or so it seemed to me as I reviewed the points I had rehearsed. I told him about the relaxation response and about the common experience of calm brought on by a repetitive prayer as documented throughout history. I told him that in the process of distinguishing the relaxation response from the placebo effect, I had been impressed by the role belief and faith played in physical processes, a role misunderstood and underappreciated by modern medicine. And I told him I wanted to study the role of prayer, and specifically the mental focusing aspects of prayer, as well as the influence of faith. But I was worried about the effect of my scientific study would have on believers and on the steadfastness of their faith, because that became apparent in the bell curve. Do you see? Dean Stendhal listened closely to everything I said before he rose to deliver a reply. Looming above me as I sank deeper into my chair's soft cushions, Dean Stendhal answered my queries directly. Young man, don't worry about us. Religion and prayer were here before you, and they will be there after you. You do your thing, and we will do ours. Interesting in that looming. Why do I keep feeling it preceded a punch in the gut? And then back to the dot, an injection. And that was what they kept doing. The B.F. Skinner, Bandura, reward, punishment, reward, punishment, reward, punishment. That's what they wanted to win the scientific debate. And we all know it was chicken and the egg. You have an answer? No, we do not. Why not? Because it's the chicken and the egg. Wake up. Wake up. We don't know. We don't know. You want to explain life differently? Fuck you. It's the chicken or the egg. Spirituality linked, and that's your whole fucking problem, because you just can't sink your teeth into something that's not sinful. And that's just a barbarian. That just is the dogs attacking what they narrated to be a Jezebel. It is just, yeah. We all try and do our, well, no, that's just not true. I mean, there are some people who don't try and do their best, right? And that really is the crux of it. And what do you do with those people if they aren't people at all? If all they are is bad spirits? You know, what are you willing to do? And that's really what it amounts to. The National Zoological Institute was looking for, what are you willing to do? Are you willing to do it for your daughter? Are you willing to do it for your husband? Are you willing to do it for your mother? Are you willing to do it for your father? How about your nephew, right? How about your brother, your sister, your aunt, your uncle? How much are you willing to do? And that was the whole thing. Are you willing to lose an eye? Are you willing to break an arm? Are you willing to lose a leg? I didn't say you lost it. We're going to see in the end if it's an eye for an eye. It's not an eye for an eye. It didn't work. It doesn't work. An eye for an eye doesn't work. Spirituality linked, because it's never an eye for an eye. And that is what has been demonstrated. Spirituality linked to health benefits. I already told you, it's chicken and the egg. spirituality linked to health benefits. And so it was that I began the delicate study of repetitive prayer, of the faith in God that usually accompanied it, and of the extent to which both helped people in measurable medical ways. And this is such a hands-off approach, right? What a hands-off approach. I can observe you all day and all night and have the answers to that question. I mean, any idiot could observe you all day and all night and have the answer to that question for a week, right? 6 months, 18 months. But it shouldn't take you 5 years. Now you're bordering on, I can't learn because I have an ulterior motive. Not the winner either. The effects of the relaxation response already had been established. Non-religious people and those who approached mental focusing as a health-enhancing exercise, not as a spiritual one, experienced physiologic changes and benefits just as religious believers did. But as much as traditional medicine urged me to exclude faith from consideration, 80% of my patients chose to say a prayer to elicit the calm of the relaxation response. Because my patients were naturally drawn to prayer, I found myself in the awkward position of being a physician who taught people to pray, despite the fact that I encouraged people to use any repetitive word, phrase, image, or even repetitive activity such as knitting or jogging to focus their minds and bodies. That's a really good sentence to hear, because this is what this scientist wanted to study, prayer, but not because it embodied or involved the right plan, or that right plan was biased in any ways. It was because it was the one out of all that list of things, which isn't very large, right, that they would do. As a relaxation technique, if I gave you the choice, instead of randomly assigning you to a relaxation technique, I won't be in this study if I'm not assigned to the one I want to go to. That should tell you something, right? So which one did they want to be assigned to? And we've got prayer, repetitive word, repetitive phrase, or repetitive image, or repetitive activity such as knitting or jogging. Your choice. Your choice to focus your mind and bodies. Now, some people certainly would have picked the repetitive activity, right? I probably would have picked the repetitive activity over prayer, like teaching, right? But although this helped me, it was always an offering of prayer. Every part of this has been an offering of prayer. What I choose to read, what I choose to talk about and digest, what I choose to believe in, what I choose to push and pursue, right? What I choose to fill my purpose. And every filling moment in between is a prayer. Much of it as framed as a prayer. Oh dear God. Oh dear God. Right? Most of it framed as a prayer. But I do get, when you start that you can't frame your prayer that way, And some people can't even hear that, right? I can hear that. I can hear that some people can't even hear the G-O-D word, right? So I've been in my prayers, I do say a lot of the G-O-D word, the capital G-O-D word, right? Not the small G-O-D word. And I think I clearly distinguish. So hopefully that makes it less bothersome. And then also in my prayers, I use Lord a lot. And oh, what was the other one? Oh, and Jesus. I don't use Jesus like dear Jesus, but I do say dear Jesus in my everyday life, right? A lot, and call upon Jesus's name in my everyday life. So the physical person connects to me in a physical way, right? And the higher power that I pray to, I can ask in Jesus's name. I want God to know, my capital G God to know, that I recognize his son, right? That I recognize the human sacrifices that his son had to make in every way, both as a capital G God, both as a small G God who is never fulfilling those expectations. Right? I mean, we talked about it. We said it. It's done. You didn't save me. I did everything. Right? So, and that was that to me is the devil calling himself God. But even the devil couldn't call himself a capital G God. Even the lie made him perspire. Let's read a little bit more, okay? My only stipulation was that my only stipulation was that it be something that patients liked and felt comfortable with, so that they would be more apt to adhere to the routine of eliciting the relaxation response. So clearly what this is saying is I had to eliminate. I did have a random plan, but nobody would join this if it was a random plan. They wanted to pick and choose. And by the way, that makes more sense. So fuck you and your random assignment. And it has to be this way and it has to be that way. We saw in the bookless classroom what you said had to be titles, and you had no idea what had to be titles since you were inebriated most of the time. Not only did most patients choose scripture or prayers, but 25% of those who elicited the relaxation response experienced an increase in spirituality, whether or not they intended to. Dr. Jared D. Cass, professor of Lesley College Graduate School of Arts and Science in Cambridge, Massachusetts, other colleagues and I developed a questionnaire to pin down what people meant by spiritual when they talked about the effects of mental focusing. Again, whether or not the practitioners considered themselves religious, those surveyed said two things about this sense of spirituality. They felt the presence of an energy, a force, a power, God, that was beyond themselves, and this presence felt close to them. It's simply put, right? And that's the whole thing. It's like, okay, scientists, all this money, and you just missed the simplicity of all of this that's done by what? An undergraduate student? Yeah, check the data. In addition, the 25% who felt more spiritual as the result of eliciting the relaxation response experienced fewer medical symptoms than those who did not experience spirituality. 25%. This whole book is demonstrating what a waste of our money, what a waste of our time, what a waste of your intellect. What a waste. What a waste of your intellect. This amorphous sense that we had nailed down the presence of something beyond them that nevertheless felt close to them seemed to lend the body's additional healing effects over and above those of the relaxation response. A dearth of research. This should not have come as much a surprise. After all, something as time-honored in people's lives as faith surely must have been dissected and quantified by medicine before. According to a 1990 Gallup poll, 95% of Americans said they believed in God and 76% said they prayed on a regular basis. How is it possible that Western medicine had missed something as integral to life as seemingly therapeutic as faith? I researched this question while reviewing the medical literature for confirmation and what I had found that faith could heal. And I was disappointed to learn that Dr. Robert D. Orr and Reverend George Isaac of the University of Chicago, in their review of 1,066 medical journal articles, found only 12 that assessed religious factors, a mere 1.1% of the total. There's the site back there. Indeed, doctors Jeffrey S. Levin and Preston L. Schiller of Eastern Virginia Medical School found only 200 studies that included religious findings among the hundreds of thousands of English medical journal articles published over the past 200 years. Nevertheless, the findings that were available demonstrated the value of religious belief and practices for a person's health. And in the 1990s, scientists launched additional studies of religious factors. For example, Dr. Thomas E. Oxman and colleagues at Dartmouth Medical School found in 1995 that people over the age of 55 who had open heart surgery were 3 times more likely to survive if they reported receiving solace and comfort from religious beliefs. It did not matter. And instead, they're capitalizing on IQ. Capitalizing on it. When that publishing was about demonstrating how little it takes to be able to accomplish something, IQ, of your G factor that it takes to accomplish something, and how easy it is for anybody to see and interpret that data. Dr. McCallie and I had hinted at this years before when we learned that remembered wellness. It did not matter which religion. Many aspects of religious involvement, including volunteerism and fellowship, proved to be very good for people's health. Overall, belief in God lowered death rates and increased health, according to Dr. Levin, who reviewed hundreds of epidemiologic studies to make these conclusions. Dr. McCallie and I had hinted at this years before when we learned that remembered wellness and the catalyst of belief was 2 and 3 times as powerful than medicine typically acknowledged. Now that right there, and I had hinted at this years before when we learned that remembered wellness was the catalyst. We learned that from, and this is true too. I don't know how true it is. This is what I remember in my memory, right? That we found at St. Michael's in Brunswick. A book on remembered wellness was the catalyst of belief, was 2 and 3, and said that. So Dr. McCallie from that wellness study. So that's got to be up there, right? There's number 4. I don't know. It's just amazing. It's just amazing. But my subsequent studies of the relaxation response of the natural tendency of people to add their religious beliefs to the practice of mental focusing and of spirituality's additional health benefits made the cause of faith in medicine undeniable to me. I became far more interested in the combination of remembered wellness and the relaxation response than in isolating them. I termed their combined use the faith factor. And I surmised that the reason that the faith factor was particularly potent was because we are mortals and recognize that our bodies eventually will succumb to illness and death. So in order to fuel remembered wellness, we often need to believe in something bigger and stronger than we are. Believing in a higher power helps us overcome our doubts and fears and to put aside anxieties that would otherwise inspire the fight or flight response. That way, we can mentally envision health for ourselves and send important signals to our bodies. And so the connection here again with the perversion of words, trying to make this sound like the relaxation technique was really about orgasm when the interest was there in the first place, and that's where you had to start. Where do you think those motherfucking eyeballs were? Where do you think they were? In the pornography magazines, right? In the gambling and pornography, whatever you call that bunch of fandango bunch of bullshit, right? You want the dongle, you gotta dangle, fandangle. You get a Husqvarna and the dongle. Oh, motherfucker, no kidding. Wow, I get a Husqvarna and a dongle? You mean like that? Wow, because I know how to teach women to orgasm based on the relaxation technique. And if any scientific genius wanted to make $1 billion with women, how about you figure out that schematic? Oh, she did. And it was just what? Prayer and the relaxation technique? You mean the relaxation technique that was caused because of prayer? You mean that? And that then biologically, that egg, that sperm, and they feel pretty good too, don't they? Mixing and matching and doing their thing, right? Crazy, just crazy how much of this information we had and was just ignored. And again, this is being talked about in the 1990s. So I did this as although, you can't trust the dates, whatever, but I did this as an undergraduate student is what I did this in. And purposely for just the big middle fucking finger, because we're going to see how this turns back around on you. Sitting over there saying she's all preachy, she's for the old people, it's a new day and age. How about that? Whoopee! There are some things we could do without. The modern appreciation, and we'd have a lot more money left over. So this is my case to shut down U of M. They started this shit. Goddamn well they did here in the United States on the coattails of what England wanted, smoking their dope. That's right, they called him a gesture. I got your gesture. The modern appreciation of the brain. The modern understanding of the brain supported this hypothesis because the latest brain research revealed that it was far more complex than medicine had appreciated, and because it appeared that mind and body were inseparable, interconnected entities. All our attempts to separate them artificially had began to seem foolish. All that waste since Rene Descartes. all that waste. For example, scientists once thought that the brain received messages primarily from the body and the external environment from the bottom up. Let's say one smells some freshly baked muffins. Nerve cells, I love this example. Nerve cells in the nose send a message through the body to the mindful regions of the brain where the muffin smell alert will be processed. The brain's reaction to this news will then be fired off along nerve cells so that one might begin to salivate. This is a bottom-up event. Top-down events. However, recent studies have indicated that one could sit right where one is sitting and imagine the smell of a muffin even though there isn't one baking nearby, and might again salivate. And in the process, the same nerve cells would be activated as would occur if one actually did smell a muffin fresh from the oven. This is called a top-down event because the message started not from the body, not from external environment, but from the top, in the imagination and in the mind. Now, this is the thing here, but you can't imagine heat, can you? Can you imagine heat? That's what those motherfuckers are like. Yeah, but you can't imagine heat, can ya? Well, number one, yes, you can. You can change the temperature, right? You might freeze to death, but you might have a renewed body. You know? Stuff like that. But here's the thing about this. Yeah, that's funny because that's exactly what happened to me, isn't it? Right outside the guy's house. I know, right outside his house. Whose house is that? Living in Milford. Dave Pfeiffer. All these Daves. So, and in the process, the same nerve cells would be activated as would occur if one actually did smell a muffin fresh from the oven. This is called a top-down event because the message started not from the body. Okay, so where I was getting from is the connection between these two. Now, it might be on the next page. Hold on. Representative top-down events for our understanding of the brain and body are enormous in both imaginings, and memories can produce top-down events, as I experienced in a very powerful way years ago when I was an intern at a hospital in Seattle. I was working in the walk-in unit where people could get medical attention for non-emergency care without needing an appointment. And I had the strangest instantaneous reaction to an Asian man in his 60s who came in for treatment. As soon as I saw him, I was terrified. I began to sweat. My heart beat faster. The fight or flight response activated in me for no apparent reason. I composed myself and examined the gentleman, but at the end of the evaluation, I confessed to him that I had a very strange feeling seemingly upon seeing him for the first time, and I asked him if he might know why I had reacted this way. At that time, the man smiled rather menacingly, made a gesture in which he pressed his thumb up and down on his fist and declared, "Okay, Yank, now you die." He went on to identify himself as the actor who had played the villain, Tokyo Joe, in the World War II movies I had seen as a child. He was later cast as the villain in Charlie Chan movies that I also remembered. Without posing any actual threat to me, the appearance of this man in the walk-in unit had triggered the fight or flight response. My brain recalled the same patterns of nervousness I had experienced some 20 years before as a boy watching a frightening movie. In other words, the thing we recall or imagine are very real to the brain, as demonstrated by my colleague Dr. Stephen Koslin, a professor at psychology at Harvard. Dr. Koslin performed an experiment in which people looked at a grid, a box connected vertical and horizontal lines with a letter A within the grid. He used a positron emission tomography scan, a kind of brain imaging, to identify the areas where the nerve cells fired when the people simply looked at the grid. Then he asked the same people to view a grid without the letter A embedded within it, but to visualize the letter A in their mind. Once again, a PET scan was taken to measure nerve cell firing. Dr. Coslin found that the same areas of the nerve cells were used, whether actually looking at a grid, whether the letter A or imagining the grid with the letter A, the same nerve cell firing patterns were stimulated in the brain. So remembered wellness takes advantage of the fact that our brains cannot tell the difference between what is real and what we imagine or expect for ourselves. The opposite effect, called the nocebo effect, is also possible, in which the worst that we imagine or predict for ourselves can come true, like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Some illnesses can be brought on or exacerbated, and sometimes even death can result from a very potent experience with the nocebo effect. And that's what they were using on me, because I could feel it right now, right? I can feel that, the dread. And the dread of that was that scene from, and the dread for him was seeing me. He had a real dread. And that's likely Duato, right? That's likely him. I created a real dread in him because of this narrative. And he and me because of the narrative from Crash. Yeah, can you imagine? Can you imagine the menacing effect of all of that video on people's psyche? And then to know or to not know, right? I mean, I showed you. I've got the dot. I don't know. My guess is, again, you know, the studies of how far you would go if you didn't know that you had everlasting life. How far would you go? Right? So that is, and if you continue to use prayer and faith, and if these ideas that they put in your head through masking should create that anxiety feeling, right? What did they have? Because I keep seeing McDonald's around here, right? So that's what I keep seeing. McDonald's and candid camera. Especially as all these people shoot out of here. You're on candid camera. And I did say I wanted that, but somebody had already taken it. Right? Candid camera. Instead, we got to the point. Healthy mind, body, spirit. You really have a hard time getting to the point. So, I'm going to go ahead a couple more pages. That's it for this chapter. Then we'll be on chapter 6. A good start for the person who's taking over. Who's taking over? Elena. The three-legged stool, thus remembered wellness, is empowered by a much more complex sequence of brain-body functions than previously acknowledged, and it makes perfect sense that one's expectations of a medication or one's belief in God applied to mental focusing should contribute to its effects. With this in mind, I am working to change the way in which we practice medicine in the West, incorporating remembered wellness, the relaxation response, and other valuable methods of self-care. To me, the ideal medical model resembles the three-legged stool in which a patient's health and well-being are attended to with pharmaceuticals, surgery, and other procedures and self-care. Faith and remembered wellness, namely the faith factor, obviously could be applied to all three legs of the stool. But my colleagues and I at the Mind Body Medical Institute recommend the use of the faith factor as well as other self-care methods such as stress reduction, nutrition, and exercise as a complement, not an alternative to the traditional offerings of medicine. And so you see then, if I have faith, I'm able to accomplish those other things, right? So no, you have to have faith. And a way to exercise it is through prayer. This is important because record numbers of Americans are turning to so-called alternative medicine, mostly, I believe, because patients ardently desire that medicine address spiritual as well as physical concerns, and that caregivers afford them personal attention, treating them as individuals and not as disease states. With the establishment of the National Institute of Health Office of Alternative Medicine, unconventional therapies such as shark cartilage and Chinese herbs are for the first time being evaluated according to Western scientific standards. We don't need their Western scientific standards. And even though I am sure that some of these therapies do help, I predict that in the majority of cases it is not because the techniques themselves have any inherent value as patients may think. I do believe the chiropractic massage and other therapies that involve human touch eventually will prove to be inherently therapeutic. But when it comes to other unconventional methods, I am certain that belief in their effectiveness tends the lens of therapies, their power, just as belief lends traditional medicine much of its power. As many as 60 to 90% of the medical problems that patients bring to their doctor's offices fall into the mind-body realm, those that can be alleviated by self-care methods, including remembered wellness. Physicians used to appreciate this. In fact, until the scientific age of the 20th century, medicine was, in essence, remembered wellness. Before Dr. Louis Pasteur launched our modern understanding of the germ theory, before Sir Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin, and before other great scientists discovered other medicines and saved lives, doctors had little or nothing other than placebos and reassurances to offer patients. The reputations of physicians was built on remembered wellness and on their ability to instill faith and confidence in their patients. Then, as the germ theory encouraged us to do so, scientific medicine began focusing more and more precisely on specific causes and solutions. We have almost entirely abandoned an appreciation for the context of health, namely life, and the benefits that give it meaning. But as much as modern science and technology have changed the world, and as significantly longer as is our lifespan than previous generations would have dreamed possible, each precise microscopic discovery we make still fails to answer the biggest question: how did life as we know it in all its intelligence and complexity come to be? And if there truly was a master plan to this incredible and gigantic mystery of life, how large must the master be? How large is God? Whether or not science acknowledges how large is God as a legitimate question, we continue to chip away at smaller mysteries that leave us baffled by the larger mystery. Yeah, and money too. Money to boot. As close as we may come to knowing that what compels a heart to pump or a mind body to relax, we may never know the truth about the existence of God or God's influence. Personally, I do believe in God and in an intelligent design to the universe. This is not a conviction I held before. It is rather the way that I have interpreted scientific evidence. It is inconceivable to me that without an underlying architect, life and intelligence could have come to exist. Thus, I believe in a world that is divinely influenced as much as I believe evolution and biology are responsible for a physical makeup. For my patients, however, the more important matter is not how we came to be designed, but how we can use this design for our benefit. I believe that humans are wired for God. In every age and every civilization, humans have called upon a deity or deities. Indeed, faith quiets the anxiety of the mind and the body to an extent that no other belief can. Since we humans are the only species that recognizes its own mortality, the fact that we eventually will get sick and die produces enormous anxiety for us. And because the notion of God as an infinite absolute transcends death, faith in God can transcend the anxiety and pain that might otherwise consume us. Evoking remembered wellness in a powerful way, faith in God is a supremely therapeutic belief. Some would argue that humans created this transcendent idea of God to bypass the painful reality of life and death having no greater meaning, and that this belief has become encoded in our genes. Others say that only God could have seen to it that humans believed in a transcendent power from the beginning, and that every generation since would evolve to crave faith, both physically and emotionally. A win-win situation. But whether or not there is a God, whether or not a force bigger than ourselves created us, and whether or not we were designed to pray and to be nourished physically by spirituality, faith in God, or in some form of the infinite absolute, is good for us. It does not matter to the health of the human body from whence this healthy spirituality comes, whether humans created the idea of God to soothe their anxious mortal souls, or whether God wired us to be physically enhanced by believing in and actively worshiping God. Either way, we benefit. It is a win-win situation, although to some, this may sound like a cold assessment of religious faith. I believe that there are other benefits to the human experience of faith. My patients frequently have reported experiencing spirituality and the elicitation of the relaxation response in the same rather mysterious way that people always have in quiet reflection and meditation. When people experience this spirituality, they cannot pin it down to anything more than a presence of a power that is close to them. In her book, A History of God, Karen Armstrong reiterates how important that the God access through meditation and prayer has been to religious believers around the globe. When humans abandon this notion and try to limit over personalize God, Armstrong believes danger is in store. He can be a mere idol carved in our own image, a projection of our limited needs, fears, and desires. We can assume he loves what we love and hates what we hate, endorsing our prejudices instead of compelling us to transcend them. When he seems to fall to prevent a catastrophe or seems even to desire a tragedy, he can seem callous and cruel. The very fact that as a person, God has a gender is also limiting. So indeed, we may never know how large God is, nor does it work. And that person who said that, that's the follow through of that comment right there. She doesn't know. She doesn't know how large God is. Clearly, she does not know how large God is when she makes a statement like that. So indeed, we may never know how large God is, and Karen Armstrong seems to never know how large God is, nor does it work to our advantage to apply human standards to exploring God's influence. Maybe it is better for us if the larger mystery remains. It is, however, incumbent upon science to continue to study the role of God and faith in God, and we must respect religious believers and the role belief plays in their health and well-being. My initial inklings that something was amiss in traditional medicine launched a long scientific quest, at the end of which I can say that faith is not only essential to our survival, but too important for us to set aside. People benefit from faith in extensive and profound physical ways that medicine cannot afford to ignore. As heartily as we may have tried, Rene Descartes and those of us scientists who followed his lead have failed to separate mind from body, biology from spirituality, and faith from facts. And despite what I believed 30 years ago, faith does not yield facts, and so far the evidence is compelling. Faith does yield facts. And so far, the evidence is compelling. Faith's influence over us is enormous, and for many, faith in God is the most powerful of all beliefs. We are just beginning to appreciate faith's wonderful implications for our health and our lives. That's the end of that chapter. Chapter 6, we start, I think, with a new teacher. I think we do. I'm crossing my fingers. There's one more thing I just wanted to say about this top-down effect. And it is in that example of smelling of the bread that you can see it is absolutely established in a top-down effect. It's not that it's not activated in a bottom-up, but it is, it starts with the knowledge of what that smell is. If I don't know what that smell is, it's not going to activate any of the juices in my stomach. If I don't know who God is, it's not going to activate any of the juices in my stomach for injustice. One of the things I think that atheists have forgotten is about the progress. You don't want to make any progress, but you have to make progress. You have to contribute to progress. And in doing so, you will be rewarded with your own progress. I think atheists have stood still in their progress. I think they said, we're going to take stable Annette, and that's the one that we're going to follow. Stable Annette, who is unchanging, and show you that that is the way. No, it's not. It wasn't. How much did you progress in your belief system? And in fact, did you not lose? Sarah Jessica Parker. And not in that way, right? And of course, not in that way, because we wouldn't lose her, right? We wouldn't lose her. This is Dr. Annette Feravich. Thanks so much for joining me here in the classroom. And it is Friday. So we went 4 days this week. A lot of abnormal stuff. I threw a spider out today. Didn't look like it helped him one single bit. I think they do their own thing. I think that they don't need our help. I probably put him out in the cold. He needed the heat to survive. Uh-oh, better go help him again. Dr. Annette Feravich, thanks so much for joining me. It is classroom day 338, and we have fulfilled our classroom obligations for the week. Thanks for joining me. What is she doing?